Some massive news in the Big Ten today as the conference is now in the market for a new commissioner. That is our big story as Kevin Warren has departed the Big Ten or is set to depart the Big Ten to become the president and CEO of the Chicago Bears. Warren led the conference through 3 eventful years, which started just before the COVID pandemic threw the world into an upheaval. After a challenging start, he righted the ship. USC and UCLA were both added to the league on his watch, and the conference negotiated a new record media rights deal. Warren issued a statement earlier today saying, quote, "I'm honored and recognize the responsibility bestowed upon me to lead the Chicago Bears during this exciting and pivotal time for the franchise. I look forward to building on the rich tradition that started with George Halas and connecting with the unique and vibrant fan base in Chicago. I join the Chicago Bears with gratitude and drive to carry out and build upon the legacy and spirit of this founding franchise and my predecessors. This is a franchise that's respected in all of professional sports, and I am humbled to be selected as the next president and CEO of the Bears. I sincerely thank Virginia McCaskey, George McCaskey, the McCaskey family, Ted Phillips, and the search team for the responsibility and trust placed in me to lead the Chicago Bears and deliver championships to Chicago." Obviously, a lot to unpack in this story, and who better to do it than Nicole Auerbach, who, of course, contributes to the Big Ten Network on a frequent basis, also a writer, an award-winning writer for The Athletic. She joins us from the NCAA convention in San Antonio. And Nicole, appreciate you taking the time out. Let's start here. Big picture, what does this mean for the Big Ten?
Well, the big picture is, like you just said, they're going to be searching for a new commissioner. And it's fascinating how much turnover there has been in these types of roles. Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, has been in his job for about 2 years, and he is the second most tenured person of the Power 5 commissioners. So this is just another domino in a period where there's been so much uncertainty and so much change in the leadership positions. But the Big Ten is incredibly well positioned, obviously coming off of a record-breaking media rights deal that will position the Big Ten among the SEC as the 2 clear leagues that are able to chart their course and their future in college sports. And we are going to see the gap between the haves and the have-nots continue to grow, and the Big Ten will be in that group of the haves. So that is a great position to walk into. This has also historically been one of the most influential and powerful positions in college sports. We know what Jim Delaney was able to accomplish in this role and what Kevin Warren was able to do, adding USC and UCLA and negotiating that record-setting deal in a very short period of time. So this is going to be a coveted position. It is one of the most powerful positions in sports.
You mentioned integrating USC and UCLA. Are you surprised at all at the timing based on that, or is this simply a case of this is a job that is very much in his wheelhouse, which we can get into given his history with the Vikings and the Bears trying potentially to build a new stadium and having the #1 pick and seemingly for the first time in a long time perhaps having a little bit of momentum? Is this just a function of this was the right place and maybe not necessarily at the right time from the perspective of people within the conference, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, at first I was surprised about the timing when this news broke a couple of weeks ago. But the more you think about it, the more it actually does make some sense, because the media deal is done. And we know that when Jim Delaney announced that he was going to be retiring, the next task up for the next commissioner was going to be negotiating that media deal. And that was the big thing. He got through that. He got through conference realignment and expansion. And honestly, the next couple of tasks that are ahead, and for whoever fills this position, they will be dealing with a lot of uncertainty and lawsuits and outside pressures and a lot of other people deciding the future of college sports in terms of different lawsuits, the National Labor Relations Board, Congress. There are a lot of outside entities that are going to help shape this thing. And you have all of the frustrations and consternations around name, image, and likeness and coaches and roster management and a lot of issues in the sport right now. And I think for Kevin Warren, with someone with an NFL background and a pro background, this was a perfect fit for him. And it's a perfect fit for what they're looking at with the new stadium that they want built. He's already in Chicago, likes living here. His daughter lives here. It was one of those situations, I think, where it was an opportunity to go back into a place that you are more comfortable and you like the issues that you were dealing with on a daily basis more in the NFL. We know that maybe someday Roger Goodell will need a successor. I don't know if this is the move that will position Kevin Warren to be considered for that, but I know it can't hurt. It cannot hurt to be CEO and president of one of the NFL teams if that is something you hope you can be considered for someday.
You mentioned this is a time of significant change in college sports. I think those of us who have been involved in it as long as you and I have are a little bit stunned at just how much things have changed. Even in this 3-year period where Kevin Warren was the commissioner of the Big Ten, how different is this job that whomever is going to walk into different than the job that Kevin walked into essentially 3 years ago?
Oh, it's wildly different. And let's just start within the Big Ten. 12 of the 14 presidents and chancellors that oversee Big Ten schools have turned over since Kevin Warren began. So that is also going to be very interesting as we think about where those presidents will go to hire his replacement. It is a totally different room. I mentioned the commissioner turnover at the Power 5 level. You have a new NCAA president also supposed to start this spring in Governor Charlie Baker from Massachusetts. We didn't have the pandemic. We didn't have multiple massive rounds of conference realignment. Oklahoma and Texas were in the Big 12. USC and UCLA were in the Pac-12. There has been so much that has changed, and probably nothing larger than the Supreme Court ruling against the NCAA in the summer of 2021. That has really opened the door for future challenges to the collegiate model and what athletes are able to be compensated, what money is able to go directly into their pockets. That also coincided with NIL and the floodgates opening there as well. All of that has happened since Kevin Warren took the job to become the Big Ten commissioner. So this job is very, very different. And this is part of the reason we have seen a lot of retirements. We have seen turnover. We have seen college football coaches go to the NFL because a lot of these pieces are off the field. That's the biggest difference in these positions is everything that is happening that is changing the way that the whole system works, the way that the business model of college sports is set up. A lot of that is going to be outside of their control with different lawsuits and Congress. But all of that is the priority right now. It is not managing a football schedule. It is not, making sure that you're getting to all your campuses to say hi during basketball season. Everything that is happening off the field is now the priority. And there is some clarity in some spaces, but a lot less clarity than I would say even 3 years ago in general.
So with all of that going on, what should the priorities be in terms of the successor to Commissioner Warren, in terms of a profile of the background of this person? I mean, it's just been so interesting, right? We've seen the Big 12 and the Pac-12 go completely outside of college sports. People that I don't think would have thought about as potential candidates for their job, taking commissioner jobs, whereas in the SEC and ACC, you have much more traditional hires. Kevin Warren was probably more in that former group, although obviously he had worked in the world of football. He had not worked in college sports. What's the right balancing act here? Kind of what, without necessarily naming names, what does that resume look like? Or is it kind of the beauty's in the eye of the beholder just in terms of what your priorities are?
It's going to be very much up in the air because we don't know what these presidents are going to prioritize. And again, 12 of 14 of them have turned over in the last couple of years. So even the candidates that got consideration last time may or may not get the same level of consideration with an entirely different group of presidents. What I would do is I would look very hard at candidates that have college sports backgrounds, despite the trend lines in hiring across the other Power 5 commissioners, because I think there's too much going on. You don't have time to catch someone up or ramp up when you have these legal, these cases working their way through the legal system, when you have the NLRB working on their unfair label practice charge. I just think you need to hit the ground running with an understanding of how all of this stuff works and relationships with the other commissioners, relationships with athletic directors on campus. I just think when we think back about some of the areas of friction and some of the struggles that Kevin Warren had, it was because he didn't come from this world and didn't have those pre-existing relationships and how to immediately jump into them. It also took him a while to develop his own stances and opinions on the major major issues of the day. But I think if you hire someone who has that familiarity, understands the nuances of the NCAA governance structure, or what, these different cases, Johnson, House, NLRB, Congress, have relationships possibly even on the Hill, you can hit the ground running and be a leader and be someone who is vocal on these issues instead of waiting and letting others lead first. I think you also have playoff expansion that is done. We know that that's coming in 2024, but that group of commissioners, especially the Power 5 commissioners, they're only going to be more important and more influential for the future of college football moving forward. They're going to be looking at the calendar. They're going to be looking at exactly where these games should be played for the expanded playoff. You want someone who can be vocal and lead in that room because they know people, because they're familiar with the subject matter, and because they just understand the landscape. So I personally would lean someone who has worked on a campus, worked in a conference office, but someone who has worked in this space for a number of years so that you're not starting from scratch. And I think there are a lot of candidates that fit that bill. And I will tell you, for a lot of people in college sports, I would say basically every sitting athletic director, they're going to want this job. If possible, if people can get in the mix for this, there's going to be a lot of people trying because it is one of the most powerful positions in college sports. And therefore, it's one of the most powerful positions in American sports.
Nicole, I want to leave you with this. We've actually looked ahead quite a bit here in this discussion of what's next. I do want to look back. It does seem like it's been 3 years. In some ways, it seems like it's been 15 or 20. I mean, there's a lot packed in. And as you talked about, there's just been so much change in this world. As you reflect on Kevin Warren, we've talked about USC and UCLA and the media rights deal. What will you see as his accomplishments, kind of the bullet points of what he got done in your mind at the Big Ten level?
Yeah, I think the number one thing will be the record-setting media rights deal, and that's what he was brought in to do. That's why they brought in someone with his background to negotiate that. And I think the way that it was structured, the length of the deal, those are things that are going to influence the rest of college football and sports in the country, because people were looking at the way that, how are you going to balance streaming? Which league is going to go all in on all these different things? He went with 3 over-the-air partners and went for eyeballs. And it's going to feel like an NFL Sunday on Saturday for the Big Ten. That is very interesting and influential. And obviously bringing in over $1 billion per year for your schools is massive in a time where it's absolutely, you're not sure what the future is going to look like, but you want to make sure that you are the best resource as possible to provide, to sponsor sports, to be able to compete for national championships. So that money is absolutely important. The USC, UCLA additions for the Big Ten to be the first conference to go from the Pacific to the Atlantic, that is massive. And I'll also add in a couple of smaller accomplishments we don't talk about enough, but we do highlight here on the Big Ten Network. He has done a really excellent job of elevating some of the women's sports, adding the women's basketball tournament to the same site as the men's basketball tournament so that they can feed off each other, the energy, the media coverage, that was big. And I would also say hiring a position to oversee women's basketball and the growth, that was a big move too. An actual media day for volleyball and elevating that sport, which is a growing sport. All of those things are things that I also think of as I think of his tenure, which you mentioned, COVID, canceling the season, all of the lows of that first year of the tenure. There were a lot of highs towards the end, but I would make sure that we specifically mention what he did to elevate women's sports.
No doubt. And those are things that he prioritized from the get-go, things he articulated when he was hired and absolutely followed through on all of them. Nicole, I know it's a really busy time with the convention. Always appreciate you taking time out for us to add your perspective. Thanks so much. We are back here on Big Ten Today as you see Kevin Warren and his accomplishments as the Big Ten commissioner. Many things centered around student-athlete welfare, including that voter registration drive, the Mental Health and Awareness Council, as well as the Equality Coalition, which I am honored to serve on. Also took students to the Big Life Series trip to Selma and Montgomery, Alabama, as they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We are honored to bring on now Bruce Feldman from Fox Sports to add a little bit more perspective here on this situation. Bruce, really appreciate your time on what I know is a busy morning for everyone who covers this sport. A big picture, first blush, what's your reaction to the news here today, which has been percolating, obviously, for a couple of weeks?
Yeah, it doesn't come as a surprise, Dave, given, A, he'd been in the NFL. We've heard that for years that he would love to someday maybe be the commissioner of the NFL. And so going forward, look, he packed a lot into a relatively short amount of time. It was a rocky road at the start. And then there were some really big accomplishments, both from a business perspective, and then I think, as you said, from maybe a wellness and a more of a student and even coach enrichment standpoint. Because the panel you just put up, I thought about. I had a really long conversation with Mel Tucker, the Michigan State head coach, before the season about going on that trip to Alabama and how impactful that was for him. So I think there's a lot of stuff that maybe we in the media will tend to lose, and certainly a lot of fans maybe lose sight of, that I think were important causes for Kevin Warren that I think he brought to the forefront. And I think those things are things that shouldn't be overlooked. Obviously, we're going to talk about USC and UCLA coming to the Big Ten in 2024, and certainly the massive TV deal that he was a big part of. But I think ultimately, there's a lot of other pieces to this that will be in really a remarkably jam-packed, some good, some bad legacy of Kevin Warren.
No doubt. And as someone who spent a significant amount of time around him, I can just tell you how important those student-athlete initiatives were to him, and making the student-athletes in the Big Ten citizens of the world and opening them up to everything that was going on around them. It was something he talked about from the get-go, and something he obviously followed through on. Again, I think kind of more broadly, to your point now, people are focused a little bit on what's next and what happens here. This was a brief tenure. As you said, there's a lot packed into it, but it was 3 years. That was 1/10 of the amount of time of his predecessor, Jim Delaney, just to kind of put that in perspective. How important do you think stability is right now for the Big Ten as they look to make their next hire in what Nicole outlined a few moments ago with us is a time of incredible change in college athletics?
Yeah, it's change going forward. Obviously, the TV deal was a huge thing to get done. I don't think anybody was looking at least out here, saying, oh, USC and UCLA are going to move halfway across the country and completely turn upside down the Pac-12 conference. But going forward, because of all the uncertainty at this time with so many issues, I do think it's also a critical time to be out in front of it as one of the two biggest jobs in college athletics. Obviously, the other one being Greg Sankey in the SEC. I mean, you are taking the lead, and I think with so many big brands in the Big Ten, I do think it's going to be interesting to see what the next move is. My colleagues at The Athletic, a lot of us have heard and look at Jim Phillips, a guy we both know well from his time at Northwestern, a guy with deep ties in Chicago, now at the ACC. I think it would be hard for almost anybody in college athletics, especially a guy with those kind of roots, to say, you know what, I'm good where I'm at. So I'm really interested to see what comes of the next move, because this is a big job. And the biggest thing is, it's a really, look, Kevin Warren was a really polarizing figure. Now it's 2023, almost everybody's polarizing now, it seems. But I think going forward, it's going to take somebody who is very comfortable and confident and says, you know what, I'm not going to get caught up in a lot of other little squabbling or things like that because I want to lead. And, that's not an easy job. I think you're going to look at different people from different aspects who maybe, have a hand in college athletics one way or the other. But I think this job is so much different at the time right now than almost any other job.
What are the biggest issues facing a conference commissioner today?
I think it's picking up on to where things are going. NIL is such an unwieldy mess right now in college athletics, and I think we see it operating at different capacities in different conferences, right? Even some of the schools that traditionally we think are the blue bloods are struggling to get a handle on it. And so I think how that relates to this, the student athlete, I think is going to be fascinating to see going forward. To me, that is the biggest issue right now that is facing, college sports right now. The NCAA has essentially thrown up its hands for a long time. and it's kind of got one toe in the water and the rest out. Whereas I think this is something at the commissioner level, I think that they're going to have to be a lot more involved and really have a big picture sense of, okay, what do we think? How do we get a handle on this? Because look, you're in a conference that has way more than just the football and basketball piece of quote unquote the revenue sports. There's a lot of student athletes who are really benefiting from this. And I think it can be a really great thing. But there's also a lot of, like, you know, you got the transfer portal and a lot of different issues, whether it becomes tampering and all these other sorts of issues that are really hard for the leaders of the sport to get their heads wrapped around.
Bruce, thank you so much for your insight. Obviously, a lot going on this day. Bruce Feldman, Fox Sports, The Athletic, The Audible. He's everywhere. Thanks so much, my friend.
Thanks, Dave.